will in executive session, which was to grant Mr. Borden a raise of a specific amount in a specific year. And it did not include any retroactive pay for a previous year using previous funds to either pay or a bonus.
Specifically, what section is that, Curtis? Is it
Very
five?
last of the minutes. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Is it page 3, section 5? No, it's not it. Yeah, I just want to make sure. We're all looking at the same thing. Yeah,
And
just before, just before
primary
adjournment.
book,
Yeah, I think it's page 21 of your book.
page 21 of our book.
With the red numbers at the top right.
Okay.
So it's just before adjournment there,
Yes.
where I make a motion.
I printed it out, so I didn't.
Okay, no, that's no problem. I just want to make sure we all have.
Okay, so we have, so is there any specific action? I mean, after we have your discussion, are there specific changes?
Yeah, and I'll convert that last to a move.
Okay.
A motion. All right, I will move.
Wait, hang on, I think if it converts to a motion, we have to, what, table this motion to consider a new motion? Someone help me out here, I'm not enough of a parliamentarian here to do that. So we need to table this one to consider if there's going to be an amendment. All right, so,
I would make the motion to table.
all right, so we have a motion to temporarily table the discussion related to the minutes. Do I have a second? So
Could I,
that-
a point of
yeah.
order, please?
Yes, sir.
Just while we're talking about parliamentary, we're trying to find this thing, okay.
I think it's page 21 in the PDF.
This is actually a little bit different. Our form is, the numbers are at the bottom of the page.
As to my point of order, I'm like you, I'm a little fuzzy on parliamentary procedure. The motion been made, Curtis made the motion.
Yeah.
If it's seconded, we discuss it.
Yeah.
If it's not seconded, it dies for lack of discussion. If it's not discussed, it
Well,
dies on the table.
The motion we have right now is to table the current discussion as it relates to approval
Well,
of the minutes.
I believe the motion that's on the table right now is to approve the minutes.
Right, and we're in discussion of
We're in
that.
discussion.
So he's asked for a motion to table consideration of
We
the
shouldn't-
approval of the minutes.
Shouldn't we
correct?
call the question on the minutes first?
That's one way to do
I mean, just to get that out of the way.
it. Sure.
Right,
All right, so there's a motion that has been seconded to approve the July minutes.
right,
Okay.
okay. So we
Call
can
the
act
question.
on that and then bring it back
Call-
up.
Is
So
that okay?
Well, let's have some discussion then.
Yeah.
This, because I don't know how to say.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, don't, like I count votes ahead of time. We discussed it at length and then memorialized it later, that we were going to give Mr. Borden a raise.
Yeah.
And that raise was for the current fiscal year.
Right.
Well, somehow, it got to June the 30th of the previous year, which for one day's pay increase is a substantial windfall in bonus. I don't think it was the will of the body. I don't think it's legal. I don't think it's constitutional. There are problems with prior year budgets and allocations and spending authority, all those things. We won't get into them now. So I think it's a very serious issue, and for that reason, I'd like to see us not accept these minutes.
Further discussion on the minutes.
I made the motion, as you can see, and I certainly understood it, and I had no idea about constitutionality. I suspect that no one at this table or in this room could fully explore that 10 minutes of the 2 hours that we have here.
Right.
But I certainly, I don't know one way or the other.
Right.
But I certainly understood. Perhaps we could ask Bob what he understood.
I understood that it was retroactive for that specific purpose.
But that's the way I understood it, but I mean.
Was there ever a conversation of that? Who knew that besides Bob?
We
It's
discussed
right here in the
it.
minutes. I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
The June 30th.
You voted
the June-
for it, you voted for it,
The
Kurt.
June 30th date, which is executive session, which we had otherwise, did not entail that one day's pay would amount to a $70,000 windfall. I think that's contrary to the law. I don't think it's legal. I talked to 2 different attorneys this morning, and we can get into that. But I just think that the balance of this motion was that the chairman had the right to negotiate this and the right of all this. And I don't know what that situation is, but it does give the chairman the ability to look at this I spoke with the chairman, I spoke with Mr. Joby, and I spoke to Travis, and no one understood that this was going to be a $70,000 windfall for one day's pay. In a state where the average person makes $33,000 a year, and the average retirement benefit is $19,000 a year, or maybe even $17,000 a year, I don't think that's acceptable for the use of public funds. And especially when it was never explained to me, it wasn't explained to the chairman, and it wasn't explained to Mr. Giobbi, and it wasn't explained to Mr. Pritchard. So if you knew it, I'd like to know how you knew it.
Well, I made the motion, it's right there in black and white, but, I mean, you can read it, I mean, but, okay, I mean,
Well, I mean, it relates around the issue of the PIG, right, which we know we've had a question about the structure and the mechanism and the, because it ties into that PIG question, which, you know, out of executive session, we specifically said we want to review the PIG structure and triggers with a formally adopted compensation committee, right? So, I mean, that's, you know, that's the issue, that this date, as it's currently written in the current PIC, which we've already, I think, expressly said we're not, you know, happy with the way it works and functions, right, is what's creating a lot of this issue.
And the retroactive facet of this will be repugnant to people who pay the bills. I mean, I'm not aware of anybody who, after a fiscal year is finished, after the books are tallied, after everything's settled, a group, and, or at least 4 of us didn't know, reached back and allocated more funds.
Right.
And I think as fiduciaries, we should have been told, and we should have asked. It never occurred to
Well,
me.
we should have asked, and we do have the PIC out there, right? And so I do, yeah, like I said, personally take responsibility for not having adequately, reviewed that trigger mechanism, right? I mean, I don't think that it's there, and yet, I mean, at the same time, it's hard when you look at this stuff a couple of days a
Well,
month.
and Mr. Powers and Mr. Borden both knew what was going on. We just didn't. And I don't feel right about it. I don't.
Are you suggesting that someone was Reynolds pulling a fast one or
No,
something?
what I'm suggesting is you knew the consequences of this, and we didn't. There's nothing
Well,
wrong
why'd
with
you
that.
vote for it then?
Because it was a date plucked out of history. We had discussed at length going back to 7/1. And as we were all picking up our stuff to go, y'all said 6:30. And I heard it. I thought, well, it's an extra day's pay. It never occurred to me that this commission would willfully vote to give a man a $70,000 raise for one day's pay. That's what.
Call the question.
So, call to question on the minutes. All in favor of approval? Opposed? All right. Motion fails. So now we have, so the minutes for the July meeting are in suspension, so now can we, you had a second.
And my motion was to, I'm sorry, to amend was to amend the motion to make the raise effective July the 1st, 2011.
I think from a parliamentary, this was the motion that was made and passed
Right.
at the last meeting, so there needs to be a motion to reconsider.
Yeah, so we need a motion to reconsider the previous motion.
Does it necessarily be a motion to reconsider, or since the commission sets the pay of the executive director, that always, we can vote that at any time, at any place?
You can do that too, but I think the motion is going to be to rescind.
Okay.
to
Thanks,
rescind
but I would like to
this.
make that motion to reconsider.
Since we have 2 commissioners absent who will be back,
Who's Travis right here?
he's not voting, but I would love to, just make sure we get the input. Well, we understand you had travel. Right.
No, carry this over.
Huh?
There's been a motion to reconsider that motion, so you need to deal with that motion, but you can also carry this matter over to later.
If people aren't opposed, I'd like to carry the motion over just so we have the full commission present.
But
But
will
if
we have
that's
the
not,
full, since we have people coming and going,
Yeah.
will we actually have the full? I'd rather deal with it now if possible.
all right. I'm not opposed, I mean, okay, we'll deal with it now then.
What,
Okay, just to catch you up, we were discussing the minutes, so we approved the June minutes, we were discussing the July minutes. We voted not to approve those minutes because there's some question as it relates specifically to the issue of the approval because of the effect of a June 30th date versus a July 1st date. So, Mr. Treasurer, I don't want to take your word, but if you want to volunteer catching up Travis, sort of the,
You did a pretty good job there.
Right.
And the difference between the two dates amounted to a difference of $70,000 in last year's votes. And what we've done is we've reconsidered that, and now the motion is on the floor to reconsider that.
right. And to put that in context, what the issue that's come up is that our current PIC policy, right, is based on actually final salary for the year, right? So, meaning whatever someone's pay is on June 30th at the end of the year, that becomes the PIC payment for the entirety of the period. So that comes up later in the meeting because when we talk about PIC, right, they qualified for the PIC, right? So the difference of June 30th, right, applying to the PIC as earned from July 1, let me see if I get this right, July 1 of 2010 through June 30th of 2011. The difference in this effective date, right, because of the salary change we did for Bob is about $71,000. And the question was whether or not that was the intended will of the commission as we discussed in executive session and took action after executive session. Related to the discussion around the pay raise for Bob. And the, given that the other, I think, will that came out of the commission was we weren't fully happy or pleased with the PIC mechanism, so we set up a compensation committee to review the PIC structure. But that's the issue at hand. While these minutes were, the action was made to not approve them so that we could have further discussion around that related matter. Is that fair assessment?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. So where do we stand now? I kind of lost what my next parliamentary action's supposed to be.
Motion on the floor?
All right. We
Was
have
to
a motion.
reconsider the motion from the prior meeting. Now,
Right.
as it plays out, your actions at last meeting were what they were.
Right.
And so, I would step back and say, are the minutes correct? That's a separate issue, but the motion that's on the floor right now is to reconsider the motion that passed the last meeting
Okay.
with regard to the 6/30/11 effective date.
Okay. So we have a motion to reconsider a previous motion. Is there a second on that?
I second it, but it seems to me, one thing that ought to be considered is what was conveyed to Bob. He was interviewing for another job at the time and could possibly have relied on whatever he was told at the time. So I don't know whether you understand that kind of discussion.
We've already been there, Travis, while you were late, and Bob assumed that the June 30 date was correct as passed unanimously, and based, I don't want to speak to you, Bob, I assume you based personal decisions on that.
Yes, it did. Subsequent to that meeting, I immediately withdrew from consideration.
So, but that came up earlier, Travis, but yes, Bob did.
Right, and just to put that on the table, because it was made public yesterday, the offer from which Mr. Borden withdrew, right, the guy who got it, got a $385,000 base and incentive comp up to 140% of base, so for a total potential comp of $900,000, right? So let's go ahead and get that out, right? So that was the offer, right, that at the time when we were considering the motion that Mr. Borden was, I guess it's fair for us to let it be known was, in the finalist pool 4. So when we were discussing this matter, right, we knew that was on the table. And the details of that offer are also made public. So,
And Bob's current or projected salary for the year 2011 with PIC is?
My understanding, and at least my understanding would be that his current base, right, we moved in the motion to what, 495, 485? What was it?
485.
485. We had the question about the PIG. We'd expressed sort of the potential for the PIG to go up to 100% of base, but we wanted to review trigger mechanisms and hurdle rates on it. And I would assume that until there's subsequent action on, and I'm, you know, again, I may not be understanding this, I'm just speaking personally here, that until such time as we replace it, then the current PIC structure would continue, right? So, unless someone understands it differently, or, you know, if anyone legal or anybody else, but that's my personal understanding.
I understand the changes to the PIG plan would not be effective until June 12th.
What, if we came out with a new structure?
I think this is-
Right, we had a motion that was to make it for this current fiscal year ending June 30th, 2012.
Right.
The PIC policy that was in effect June 30th, 2011 was the policy that was in effect. The
Right.
date is passed and it's memorialized. The policy for this year is still, up until this day, that policy that's in existence. We did suggest in the July meeting an alternate policy that made the hurdles a little higher to get and more align the compensation to the amount of excess return generated in the plan. That was on this table, basically. And so until such time that that policy or another policy is adopted, we're operating on the existing one. But presumably, you know, during this fiscal year, I mean, the motion was that it would be revisited and have the effect of being in effect for the fiscal year ended. So it would be in full effect for the year. That's my understanding.
Yeah, well, that's mine too, that part of the negotiations about this salary, we said the executive compensation committee, in our own, and the PIC would be adjusted, but it would be for this year. Just like the salary, and I falsely assume, would it be for this year? I'm just not aware, and I think it's contrary to public policy and to the provisions of general assembly when it comes to appropriations and HR and other things, that it's illegal for us to reach back and change an agreement from a previous fiscal year. They're all, again, we could talk an hour and a half about all that. So, but I don't know what was communicated to Mr. Borden. All I know is that as a trustee and a fiduciary, it was never made clear to me that everybody or certain people understood that this bonus would be increased retroactively. It was never made clear to me that a one-day clerical change in a payroll was going to result in a $70,000 payout. It just was never made clear. Whether or not Bob based decisions on that, I don't have any way of knowing. Whether or not he was getting another job, I have no way of knowing. What he would have been offered had he gotten that job, I have no way of knowing. I can't compete with myself. All I do know is that as a trustee and a fiduciary, I have responsibilities. And it is unconscionable to me to reach back into a prior year and grant a man a $70,000 bonus when we had done a deal. We had signed the papers, we had a deal, the fiscal year was closed, the money was appropriated and spent. And now we're going to reach back and do that, and I don't think that's appropriate, and I don't think it's legal.
Further discussion, comments, questions?
Well, I personally, I think that there is enough confusion on this point that, however, it needs to be modified, clarified, corrected, however you want to term it. It needs to be addressed, one way or the other. But I don't think we should be. If there are legal questions involved, I'm certainly not confident to make that judgment. Curtis, you can also say you don't feel like you're confident in it. Maybe that is a question for us. I don't know. But I do feel in all fairness to Bob, that it's something we should settle, and we shouldn't be dragging this thing out. As far as Bob's shoes, I'd be very, I think it'd be fair to him, it'd be fair to our constituents, people we represent, we need to settle it.
Yes, sir, I agree.
There's a motion on the floor, we're waiting for a second. Travis seconded. My question is, can Travis second a motion? Okay, so we have a motion that's been
Right.
seconded.
Motion has been seconded, we're in discussion as it relates to reconsidering the previous motion.
To me, the previous motion clear, I second it happened also.
Okay.
And so, you know, it was a motion, and it got approved.
Right.
And Bob was told that's what it was, right?
Right.
So, I mean, maybe Mr. Lofton didn't understand that at the time.
Did you understand that the bonus would be retroactive and it would be a $70,000 increase?
Yes, I understood that.
And who told you this?
I heard the motion from, I think.
I made the motion.
And from the date you knew that there would be a retroactive bonus?
In general, I'm not particularly in favor of that. I mean, I think a salary change is going forward, not backward. But I think that is what the motion was, that apparently was reading to that situation where it's important. And, you know, I think having seconded the motion, I think we need to have the way it's been managed. I think that's a good option for us.
Well, I mean, I don't doubt that that's probably the way it was. The question is whether that's what was intended, right? I mean, I think there's sort of I think we have to deal with those two issues separately, right? I mean, I was on a cell phone, so I don't.
I think you hit on the crucial point,
Right.
what was done and what was intended, and what was understood.
Right.
Looks to me like there is sufficiently enough confusion or lack of understanding how we want to term it, that somehow we need to.
Right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
It seems that what might be the most pragmatic thing to do, because certainly it's always awkward for me to talk about something like this, because clearly the commission sets my compensation, I do not. But Mr. Giobbe's point, I think, is well taken, that we should have a well-thought-out answer, but a swift one, but one that's well thought out. And I also think that it would be wise to have the full commission involved in that decision if we need to get a legal opinion on it. Because certainly, from my standpoint, the last thing I would want to do is receive any monies if there's a legality issue. I wouldn't want any part of that. So I would want that cleared up very well. So what this really affects later in this agenda is the approval of the PIC payout for last year. I would volunteer to say I'm fine setting mine at that prior salary level and leaving this additional money subject to a proper legal resolution. So we just clearly give to it.
Well, and I think part and parcel of that, I mean, the bigger issue, I think we all probably appreciate that statement. But I think to get the quick resolution on compensation, because I think we'll I think hear this later in the Deloitte presentation, right? Our human resource and, strategy is one of our key risks, is highlighted in the risk policies. I don't want to front run us, but I've had the benefit of having seen it and had some subsequent conversations. I think if we can get to quicker resolution on what the comp plan is, and I think if we have to reach out and get outside help to do that, it would behoove us to do it quickly.
I'm not sure that any employee has the ability to waive payment. They need to study about the couple issues. I think we need to dispose of it. We can easily vote again at a later date, but that'll be a time when the vote is transparent and accountable, and the ramifications of such a vote, especially in the deep background of PICs and things, are made, and everybody understands it. I think it is important that we reconsider this vote
Right.
and do away with this issue. And then we're completely able to bring it up at any later date we choose. We set the compensation, that's the majority vote of the commission.
So I'm trying to think through what the series of motions and actions that we gotta walk through here.
This was after.
One concern that I have, Alan, something Bob touched on, his situation notwithstanding, is, the program in general, there are a lot of people sitting in this room who are expecting and deserve and have earned adjusted compensation completely aside from Bob, nothing to do with this discussion about Bob. And anything we do to hold that up is, in my mind, well, this whole discussion is inappropriate as far as I'm concerned, but certainly for the people, Bob notwithstanding, it would be inappropriate to hold up any money from them just because people didn't read something they voted unanimously on.
Well,
So,
the way that the rest of the employees, we don't even impart on that. I mean, that's under the
Is that-
agency head, so I don't know why they would be
I don't
affected.
know, Bob just mentioned that.
But you do have to
I-
approve
I
the
just-
final payment, which is on the agenda. We have all
Right.
the audit reports and the required steps within the PIC policy. And pursuant to that policy, the final review of that has to be done by the commission, and that's approved.
So I just would, want to make sure we don't hold everybody else up just because we're taking advantage of Bob.
Well, I don't think we're taking advantage of Bob. The commission operates oftentimes. Just think about this time last year, in October, November of last year, we were involved in New Code and DevCo. And the commission took the responsibility, they took the position, they had no public responsibility, only the statutory authority to invest and manage the money, and do so as they damn well please. Now, we have fiduciary responsibility, and there are other people. This commission does not own these funds. These funds are owned by the people of the state of South Carolina. They're housed in a trust by the Budget Control Board, and these funds are shared by a lot of people.
I'm aware of all of that.
Well, yeah,
Chris.
so
I've been
I-
doing this for 6 years.
That's
so
right.
I don't need
you-
instructions on.
That's right, and you were also
on,
involved in the New Code DevCo thing. And so what we've got here
What's that have to do with
is an overreach of our statutory authority and an abrogation of our public space mentality here. What we've got also is like, when we started this executive compensation commission, I said, well, great, what did Bob do? I like Bob, don't want anybody to think this, but I don't know, does Bob work 5 days a week, or is he in Washington or New York 6 days? I have no idea. So I said, let me have a copy of your calendar, something anybody would ask me. Can't get it, had to file an FOIA to get where I'm a trustee and a fiduciary and a custodian of the funds. I had to file a document that a taxpayer had. I have not just an ability, but an obligation to pursue my fiduciary responsibilities, and they stand in the way. That's not the first time that as I reach for accountability and transparency, I can't get it. And then here we have where it appears that I'm the only one, and it's not unreasonable to think that no one mentioned that we were going to have a $70,000 retroactive pay. I think that's germane. I think it's maybe I should have known that. Maybe I should have known that, but it never occurred to me, and I've never seen any other organization ever reach back into a previous year and change an agreement. Because if we can reach back and change that one, what else can we change? Can we change it the other direction? It doesn't make sense. And we also have to.
That's all a great speech and everything, but to my point that I made, let's just make sure if we can, and I'm not sure parliamentary how we do it, that Bob's situation doesn't affect the other employees. That's all I'm suggesting.
And just a couple of points of clarification. One, the funds in the plan, or once they're in the trust, they're the funds of the beneficiaries of the plan. They aren't the funds of the taxpayer anymore, right?
Don't belong to the taxpayer.
Right, so I did at least want to clarify
They have
that
to be,
one.
those people have to be taxpayers. But there are other funds that go in from way back and from the employer contribution. And once they go into the plan, they are, but there are tax dollars involved here. Let's not pretend that
Tax
they
dollars
aren't.
involved, but
Yeah.
the funds themselves.
That's right.
belong to the-
Held in trust by the Budget
the
Control Board.
citizens in the plan.
So I've kind of gotten lost where we are on motions and stuff.
Could I make one comment, and I don't know whether this is correct or not, someone else may be able to say. I believe when we made the previous increase in Bob's salary 2 or 3 years ago, that we also made that one retroactive. I could be wrong, and Nancy could check that out or may remember. But I think we probably have a precedent of doing this in the pass. That's what it's checking.
I think the commission doing that does not, and it might be a precedent,
That
but
doesn't
it not
make it
be a
right.
legal precedent.
That
It may not be a legal precedent.
Well, how do we want to move forward here? I think, again, we can discuss this from now until next week. The question is, what procedure do we want to use to resolve it? If there are legal questions involved, then we should get proper legal authority. If there are ways to make sure that bond is fairly treated, I want to make sure that we do that. But I think we need to decide how we want to move forward.
Well, all right, so I have to deal with the current motion that's on the floor, I believe, right? We have a motion of some sort to,
The motion was to reconsider
Consider.
that motion.
was to
So
reconsider.
in order to reconsider that motion, reconsider the previous motion, this motion that's on the table has passed.
Okay. And we have a second on it, so we're in discussion on that. So I guess we need to call to question this issue to whether or not to first reconsider, and then we would have to have a proposal on whether to amend. Is that a fair statement? Right.
And this allows us to do, as Ed had mentioned, it allows us to remove Bob from the rest of the plan. So the rest of the plan moves forward, and then the Bob situation is determined at whatever point the chairman feels necessary.
Huh?
Does that take the other employees out of this discussion then? In other words,
I think it, well,
The other employees are never part of this discussion.
right.
They're going to be part of the PIC discussion later.
They're going to be part of the PIC discussion
that-
later and
okay, that's
approval.
what- but, okay,
Right.
we're just, okay, so we're all on the same page here.
Right.
That any of the arrangements that we presently have in place for compensation for
Right.
employees are not in question.
Right.
And to that point, though, I guess there is a percentage based on the old salary, correct in presuming that at least there's consensus that that was payable.
Mhm.
And so what my offer is to try to diffuse this time bomb here and to come to a very thoughtful, proper resolution is I would like to suggest that in approving the PIC payment later in this discussion, that mine is approved at the old salary rate, that's paid, and the amount in question is resolved with some proper legal review and efforts of commission, and probably in this subcommittee as well, and gets put to bed. That's my suggestion. Because like I said, I do not want to receive anything that later it turns out that there is a legal issue. And I certainly don't want to be in that posture.
All right, so we're in discussion on the motion to reconsider a previous motion. It's been duly seconded, it's been discussed. I guess we need to call to question whether or not we're going to reconsider it. It's not changing anything, it's just a motion to reconsider it.
Reconsider what?
The previous motion, to basically.
This motion here.
This motion
Okay.
here,
I got
right,
it.
so we're on a motion whether or not to put this one back on the table, right? Because I assume the next motion would probably be to amend the previous motion, but in order to even entertain that motion, we gotta get it back on the table. Right. So, all in favor of putting this one back on the table for, yeah, I see a question mark here.
I just want to make sure, I want to be absolutely crystal clear on what we're voting on.
Right, all right, we're voting, so this was the previous motion that was passed
In July.
in July.
When you say the previous motion, what is exactly you're referring to?
Mr. Powers' motion was made, seconded by Dr. Pritchard, passed to base the salary June 30th, 2012. That paragraph right there. Okay? So the motion is to take that motion and put it back on the table for consideration, because otherwise it's not out there for discussion. So if we pass here, I would presume the next motion that I would hear, I don't know this for a fact, but I would presume the next motion that I would hear would be to somehow then amend that. We'd have to have that as that would have to be duly seconded, that would have to be discussed and then passed or voted down. So it could be reconsidered, it could be turned down, it could be reaffirmed, right? But we can't even consider that until it's back on the table. So the motion before us right now is whether or not we're going to reconsider the motion that's on the screen there.
That's right. That's the vote that allows us to go where Bob, I said he'd go. It's
Right.
Pluck him out of the situation.
Right.
And resolve it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I got it.
all in favor? Opposed? All right, so did we get that vote count? All right. So we passed the motion to reconsider,
That was
3-1. Mr. Powers? Okay. Now there's the, we didn't put a dollar amount in that previous motion, because they're really, so, I'm just sitting here thinking, because if, there are two ways to handle this, right? That I think, this is just me kind of brainstorming on the fly, but, one of the issues is whether or not to reach back into a prior year. Obviously, if the intent was to base a salary decision, right, in order to get to a total dollar comp that some understood one way or another way, we certainly could re-entertain even the salary amount that was discussed for the current budget year, right? So, but that wouldn't have the retroactive effect. So, that's just kind of me.
I think the only motion needed is to change the date. I think that, the commission discussed it pretty solidly about what they wanted to do. The only thing that wasn't discussed was the retroactivity.
Well, but I think if some of the commissioners understood it differently, right, to get to a total comp, right, I'm just throwing that out there, that one of the things we could reconsider was the actual base salary amount as it was struck at $495, right? At $485. So if the intent was in fact $71,000, if we're going to reconsider the previous motion, which was related to the salary, I would say that presumably some of the other members, as expressed, might want to consider a change in what that base amount is, right? So there are really two potential things in the reconsideration of the motion. One is what is the base salary amount, and the other is the effective date.
Okay,
Right.
if I may, Mr. Chairman, one thing to remember in terms of state employee and state employment salaries is that there's lag time. So we're looking at the effective date that the amount goes in play versus the date that the actual payment starts. So like, for instance, typically with cost of living increases, when the legislature used to approve those, they were effective for the pay period beginning at the fiscal year.
Right.
So paperwork-wise, it was earlier in June when it was effective, but the payout wasn't until like June.
We have that with the PIG now, just as a matter of clarification. All this aside, we're not paying the PIG until the fiscal year is over. We're up later today to approve paying a PIG. In this current fiscal year, that was earned last year.
Right.
And that's because as of June 30th, you don't have all the data to properly compute and audit and review. It takes several weeks to get there. And that's how that's always done. So you're paying in arrears for something earned. You're deferring it basically until you can get all the audit and list. Let's kind of make that.
It might be helpful if I make the same motion, just change the date, and then if anybody feels to change, they can amend that. That gets us up on the platform. And also, while I understand the lag time, the Comptroller General's office and the Treasurer's office does do special checks. You can get outside that system, and I don't believe it could be a trouble. Yeah. So we could say, just the exact same program we had, effective July the 1st, 2011. And he can be paid from that very first day at the rate we all agreed. Now, if anybody, and that's the motion I'd like to make, is that the exact same motion, with the exception of change the date from June the 30th to July the 1st.
And that would be, Curtis, just so we're clear, if we're looking at on the screen there, the second paragraph, you would change that effective June 30, 11 to July 1, 11, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Just to be, I just want to make sure that
Exactly.
we're, okay.
And then if anybody, so I'd like to make that motion,
Right.
which I think I just did. And then if anyone wanted to try, wanted to adjust the pay or anything else, it would certainly be proper now.
Because the effect of that motion then is to remove one-day pay that's been paid, because June 30th is paid. And the effect of that motion would be to remove the $70,000 sick pay.
Right.
But Bob would still be able, if we pass the, later on, get everything except the $70,000.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, sir.
All right, I just want to make sure everybody, okay.
But the reason why I threw out the other possibilities is that would be the impact of that change.
Got it.
But if the prior intent had been, then there's certainly other amendments or motions that could be considered by the commission body as well, that would function differently. So I think I have a motion?
Yes, sir.
Have a motion to amend the prior motion to make the date from June 30th, 2011 to July 1, 2011.
Yes, sir.
Right. Does it have a second? A second? All right, discussion. All right. All in favor? Any discussion?
Well, you know, I'm going to vote against it.
All in favor of the change in the date from June 30th to 2011 to July 1, 2011? Yeah. All right, opposed? All right. All right, now the question is, do I have any other, my vote was for changing. Now, do we have any other motions that people would like to consider? If not, I'll relinquish the chair because I would like to make one. So can we, I guess we can elect a temporary vice chairman, so I can relinquish the
I'm
chair.
looking at one right there.
All right, all in favor of me temporarily relinquishing the chair to Mr. Powers?
I thought it was
Or Mr. Giodi? All right, Mr. Giodi. All opposed? Okay. I would move that we reconsider Bob's effective pay, right? That we set at 485 to a level of $555, right, effective July 1.
I'll second that.
So, you're the chair, so we're going to discuss.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say why I want to do it, is because we have two issues, right? There's clearly misunderstanding on this that I think has a lot of questions around it that we need to address. It also brings up a whole employee issue of what was understood, what was communicated, that needs to be addressed, right? I think at least in terms of money, this gets us on a path and puts it in the current year, right? So that we can then go and get a properly structured pick and be able to communicate to people, right? So it makes it money equivalent. I think handles it better with the way it's understood, right? And it puts the onus back on us to, get this issue put to bed in the interim. So as opposed to Bob getting $71,000, in essence, what starts happening, he starts accruing that $71,000 additional, right? If that were the original intention, until such time as we get our ducks in a row to have the pick structured the way we want it structured on a go-forward basis, right?
I appreciate what you say, Alan. I always agree with what you intended. But that flies in the whole theory that we're working more toward a pick program, we're working more toward, and we call it pick, it's
Yeah.
bonus.
Yeah.
And we wanted to go more toward a bonus in this. And as we are determining that pick program now, if that's the will of the body, I see that's where we should go with it. I think it's counterproductive to say, hey, we want to have a more bonus pick structure, we want to pay for performance, we want to be more aggressive in that way, and then turn around and raise the base pay.
Right.
Because either we're going to have to lower one or raise, it puts us in a precarious situation.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. I think the issue is that for the employee pool, right, they don't know when we're gonna get that done. right? And I think they do have a right, and I think it would be bad policy for us not to at least give some sort of, outline and some sort of burden on us, right? I mean, it puts an actual financial burden on us to get off our duff and get it done, right? To address this key issue in a timely fashion. I mean, if we can get that done in 30 days, it's not that,
And I would certainly, like any of our employees, because we've had these discussions internally, that move, if the PIC plan was changed to have, very performance value-added link to it, so it's very clear that these monies are excess monies that are being generated here, and it had higher upside, we would accept the lower base. So at that point, that other part was determined, I, for one, I wouldn't have had it this time.
Would you want to accept an amendment to your motion that the increased salary would be reconsidered at the time the other issue is resolved in the future? And the reason I'm saying this is, I hate to see us go to a higher salary than we thought was appropriate as just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I definitely would amend it. I mean, I think it's important that people understand what their comp package looks like, whatever combination that is of salary and PIC, right? I just put the motion out there, if the prior intention had in fact been to get Bob the $495 plus the 70, this would be, I think, a more logical way.
I never knew that we were trying to do 495 plus 70. If I'd have known that, it would be different.
Right.
Also, I think at 550, that puts us ahead of virtually every state. Maybe there's another state out there, but certainly above our compadres, because at the National Association of State Treasurers meeting, I caught a brief from each and every one of them. Because as soon as they hit the paper, what we did, of course, their guys come. And it's much like kids to the lollipop factory. And so it starts off the chain of reaction. And I think, am I wrong? Does anybody make a base pay higher than 550? I don't see the state of South Carolina paying the highest fee for really anything, but especially in the retirement system that is suffering. Just don't see it. We occupy a public space. We must be conscious of what we're doing here. And I won't get much into it more.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I did talk with Deloitte's compensation people, and it's a very typical structure, just to, for the benefit of that discussion, is, they're used to seeing PIC plans and investment type organizations run up to 200% of base, right? So you have to think, and then, at that upper end, they said there'd be about a 20% probability, right? Meaning you set out the hurdles, there'd be about 20% probability of hitting it at the 50% of that level. So that would be, in essence, 100% of base pay. There'd be about a 50% probability of hitting that, right, if the hurdles are set out correctly. And then for more minor levels, kind of the 20 to 30% of base pay, the probability of hitting those in a properly compensated plan would run about 80%, right, under most scenarios.
I think, I was speaking with one of our prime staffers from the Treasurer's Office, who's doing a lot of the legwork on the Executive Compensation Commission. She thinks 60 days is where we are. I think that there's been a lot of research done, there's a lot of goodwill. But I again think that for us to be the trendsetter, for us to be the rock star and to pay the salary that I'm not aware of any other state paying, I think it's bad business. And
Right.
so,
But-
the consequence of that, we're voting against it.
Yeah, I would just add at this point, I think that rather than try to attack this compensation issue piecemeal, where we're talking about raising the base salary and maybe adjusting the pay to a lower entry point or whatever, or having a lower salary, higher pay, whatever. To me, it makes a great deal more sense to have a compensation committee to sit down, come up with one unified compensation. I think it would be fair to Bob. I think it would be fair to all of us. I think it's fair to the people of the state of South Carolina.
I think it's much more transparent.
I think it'd be completely much more transparent. I think one other thing, I think that given some time interval for this comp committee to meet and discuss, that would give you adequate time to get enough information as to what our peer group, what our peer group, how they're being compensated, so you have enough hard evidence to make a good, sensible decision that we can all live with, that Bob can live with, that Bob is happy with. I I think quite frankly that we're all happy with, and we have enough information that we can make an intelligent judgment. I'm not sure that we have all that.
I would strongly suggest that we engage a third-party professional consulting firm
And
that
I would
has
be
access
all
to
in
data
favor.
we'll never have access to
Having
really give us
having a third-party consultant give us an objective, timely review of state compensation levels, or not simply related to state, but to money managers. in
whoever we're
general.
trying to compete with.
Exactly, and I think that would give us enough hard evidence to make a much more intelligent decision.
Well, I think I understand what the will of the more senior members of the committee than I have, and I agree with them. And I'm more than willing to commit the time and my staff to making sure we do this expedition.
Okay, so.
This doesn't have to be a 9 or 10 months exercise.
All right, so I made a motion, and I'm not the chair, so I guess we need to call to question my motion, so. You can
Well,
call to question my motion, since you're the chair right now.
Let me understand, you want me to question your motion?
No, call to question, so
Call-
we can vote
Call for a
on.
vote.
All right,
Call for a
let's
vote.
call, okay, let's call for a vote on.
All in favor of my motion?
Should we have a second?
Yeah, because we had seconded, so we can
So
discuss
All right,
it. Right.
just to be clear, your motion was
Was
to
to change the-
increase
you're right,
Bob's
right.
salary,
Right.
base salary.
Right.
Base salary.
And with further discussion of the thing.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Do I have a second?
Well, it's already been
It's already been
seconded, so
seconded.
all we're doing now is to vote it up or
Fine,
down.
okay. All in favor? Opposed?
All right. All right, then I want,
Now we go to the original motion.
no, we'd already passed.
Thank
the
goodness,
original.
thank
Right.
goodness.
Right.
But now we're back to the July minutes. Obviously, based on this discussion, the minutes from July were accurate.
Right, the
So
minutes from
therefore,
July are accurate.
they
You
need-
created a substitute motion this
Right.
month.
Right, so the July minutes, if they're accurate in all other respects, then those should be addressed by the commission.
This all started with approving the.
Right, okay.
It's just that
All right. So to bring back up the minutes
from July.
from July, other than that section, are there any discussion related to the minutes?
Or maybe we can have a solemn promise and never go to the minutes again. I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
All right. Motion been made to accept the minutes. All in favor? Or second? Second. All in favor? Aye. I guess to the compensation question, would we need to do an RFP for that? And do we need a motion so that we can move forward to engage a?
That'd be good.
Huh?
That would be good. The motion would help, and we do need to put a bid out because,
Right.
you know, it's not a sole source provider.
Okay. Can I get a motion to issue an RFP for purposes of compensation consultant? Right, is that fair?
Yes.
So moved.
So moved. All right. Got it? Do I have a second on that? Do I have a second on that? Second. All in favor?
Can we discuss it?
Yeah, we can discuss.
I'd just like to bring a point that that's, the RFP and the analysis, which I think is appropriate, and I'll vote for it, is probably gonna cost us more than the money we just spent an hour talking about
Yes.
by a long shot, but that's neither here nor there. But but anyway, call the question.
We'll put that in the minutes until we reflect it, and we'll compare the difference, I guess.
I'd love to see the difference.
So, motion duly second. Any other discussion?
Well, the only other discussion is we
Yeah.
should have involved this a long time ago. Had we had a third party to work on this, we wouldn't be in this situation. And we would have a more comprehensive pay plan, not just a piecemeal. But also can't count the savings of 1 year, because it is a multi-year compounding effect.
Right.
So it's significant. I think the expense well worth bearing if it's a good reason.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. All right. So we'll prepare an RFP. All right.
One note, Mr. Chairman, I understand that there is a consultant on the staff with the state somewhere. I'm not familiar with it. But if they're not well versed in this particular area, then the commission may want to do more anyway. I'm just saying.
I think we should do the RFP anyway, just to get the response. I mean, that would just seem.
This is very specialized work.
Right.
Who would select That's which one?
Compensation.
You got a
Compensation.
compensation
Well,
committee?
the compensation committee would, well, that brings up the question
Yeah,
of,
form the committee properly.
huh?
You have to form the committee properly.
Yeah, we haven't had because that's a new committee, there's not a charter, and ultimately the charter of the compensation committee needs to be approved by the full commission, right? So if we're gonna delegate certain powers that otherwise would reside to the commission, we need to do so through the subcommittee
Just like we're doing with the
charter,
audit.
just like we're doing with audit.
One thing, later in your meeting, though, you are going to be considering amendments to the current committee policy. One of those amendments sets as your standing committees, which are the standing committees currently, as I understand it, the audit committee, the budget committee, and the compensation committee. And during that period, when y'all are discussing that, you could make a motion to authorize the compensation committee to take care of the RFP, if that's the will of the
But there's no reason we don't start and issue the RFP.
Yeah,
It's gonna
yeah,
take
that's
months.
right.
It's just the
Right.
compensation committee
Right.
figures out who they want
Right,
to
but
select.
if it's able to move forward in the interim between meetings,
Right.
I would like for it to be
Me too.
empowered to go ahead
Because
and.
it'll take us 90 days from soup to nuts to kind of,
Right.
turn around and back.
Right. So I just,
Alan, would it also safe to assume that once you get a report from a third-party consultant, that the compensation committee would then come and make a recommendation to the entire?
I think that would be the logical course of events.
And the first thing we do in the compensation committee charter is spell out the scope, the
Right.
depth and breadth of what all the compensation committees want to do.
Right.
Because it ought to do a good deal of stuff, actually, being a high-functioning committee. There's a lot of recruiting and other elements that should be thought about.
Alan, it just occurs to me, as part of what we're talking about, should it be a broader context, Bob, in terms of the organization as a whole, in terms of other employees, or, I mean, while we're at it? does that
Well,
make
that's,
sense?
what I'm looking at two engagements that I think we're going to need. You'll see this very apparently when we come out of the risk assessment. We're going to need to inject a great deal of horsepower and budgetary money on our reporting and technology problem. We have a big problem. Likewise, we have, much more broader speaking, a human resources problem, a recruiting and retention, compensation being one piece of it, but training, recruiting, and retention of employees. And it would be good to get a little more holistic help than just get a compensation survey. Because to run the organization properly, I think we have to have a really thoughtful recruiting and training mindset.
I personally, I think that's a very important and very good point, because I think $26 billion is not a small amount of money. We need professional staff, and we need the kinds of policies that will help us not only to attract, but to retain high-quality personnel. So I think that taking all of that together is important. Fits, I think, quite honestly, fits into not just Bob's compensation, but how we handle our organization.
The entire organization, not only how they're compensated, how we're hired, but how we help people work together, how we train employees, and how we work on, putting them in the right roles and, getting everybody at maximum utility. And you'll see that if we do that, when we go into this risk assessment, you will be addressing about 3 points of the risk assessment by addressing this through this compensation phase. So I think it's very appropriate. And it will give it a very professional, arm's length development. And it will be light years better than the process out.
Yeah, I would hate to see us come back 6 months or 18 months from now and be talking about the very thing that we should have been talking about now. And I think this is a great opportunity to do just as well.
all right, I'm having, my computer's like frozen up over
We're
here.
just a
Someone
minute.
will tell me what the
Take
next
it from
agenda
Yeah.
item is.
The next agenda item is the investment items, and we're going to start with the quarterly report and get a update on August and our current asset allocation. And I've got a few comments I want to make at the end about what we've been doing about rebalancing and the like. But what I'd like to do is turn it over to Keith Gronkowski from New England Pension Consultants to go over the quarterly report, which starts on page 22 in your books. Legislative Nick, turn this on.
Great. So I'm going to start off, I'll give a quick update on Q2, and then I'll actually turn it over to Herschel. He's going to talk a little bit about the June numbers and the fiscal year to date, and then a little bit more August. So, page 2 here, market environment overview. Obviously, if you've been following the news, a lot has changed since June, so these numbers are stale, but given that I'm going to cover the second quarter, I'll talk to them a little bit. But since June, we've had the U.S. debt ceiling, we've got the downgrade of U.S. debt, Act 3 or 4 of the European debt crisis, slower growth numbers, unemployment continues to stay high. So as we look a little bit further into August, you see these numbers are changing. Trading your eye on the quarterly column there, that first column on the left, I'm going to hit some of the broader index numbers there. S&P 500, you see 0.1, so basically flat for the second quarter. Next set of numbers there, international equity markets. You think about the major 12 markets, and the EP index was 1.6, so international is a little bit better there. And then when you think about fixed income, it's Barclays aggregate or core bonds 2.3, and then the global fixed, the next bucket down is 3. Important to see there that diversified benchmark number there. There's a little footnote. You'll see it includes large cap equity, small cap, international, etc. It's about 1% for the quarter. So you see when we flip over the plan for the quarter, your plan actually was about 1%. So well diversified and you balance out a lot of risk. But in general, the end of June and then into July and August, we started to see kind of a transition from this risk-on equities, go-go markets to people kind of peeling back, looking into fixed income with a little bit more safety. Quick brief update on Q2. I'm going to flip ahead to page 15 to the actual flash report. 37, perhaps.
Two page numbers at the bottom center is NEPC, the top right, and our master page.
So again, I'll focus on the quarter, the last 3 months of the quarterly number, and Herschel will turn it over. I'll turn over to Herschel, and we'll focus on the fiscal year. In general, as I mentioned, the pension composite 0.9%, so that takes into consideration all of your traditional assets, so your stocks and bonds, and then also all of your alternatives that may have priced. Again, you have a lot of private equity in there and some real estate, so those price on a quarterly lag, so they're not always updated every week. That next number there, financial composite, 1.9%, so a little bit better, and that's based on your stocks, bonds, and everything that is traditional and prices daily. In general, like I did, I pointed out the 1.0% for diversified plan, and again, your pension composite overall is 1%. So a good quarter given that the equity markets were basically flat. Looking at some of the managers, one of the positives, AJL or Aronson, 1.1 versus a -0.5 for benchmark, so they had 160 basis points of value there. Basically, the story there is good selections, stock as far as in consumer discretionary and consumer staples. The rest of the small cap guys in the mid growth and value areas, basically in line, plus or minus a little bit around the benchmark, so no big stories there. The next significant bucket at the bottom is emerging market equities. You see that's something that just got funded within the past year. And as the market started to slow down, you start to get a little bit hit as far as those investments. In general, -1.5, so right around the benchmark there. Flip to the next page. That's where we start talking about your global fixed income, your core fixed income, emerging market debt, and GAA. Similar to your equities, no big stories in either core or global fixed income. All of them are pretty much in line or right around the benchmarks. We'll skip down to the emerging market debt. It's something that's actually going to be coming up on the agenda later, so I want to point that out. You'll see 3.9% for Cap Guardian. There's an item on the agenda to kind of move a little bit more towards emerging market debt. You see 3.9 versus 2.2, 2.3 for bar cap aggregate, so we continue to see good opportunities in the emerging market space. We'll discuss that a little bit further when we talk about matching needs. Cash and short duration, you see 0.4%. Follow the Fed at all, they basically said rates are going to be near zero until 2013, so there's really no income to be had out there. So given that you got 40 basis points on your short duration, and that's a pretty good performance, given that the short rates are at zero. And if anybody looks at their savings account, you'll know what I'm talking about. We get enough of these as far as returns. Skip down to GAA. These are what we call risk parity or some better beta buckets. The reason you put this in your plan, similar to hedge funds, so you want to dampen the volatility of the plan. When stock markets are going up or down, you want to be able to take advantage of that a little bit. So Bridgewater all weather, 6.3% for the quarter. You'll see that outperformance versus GMO and Putnam, and then again, if you remember the SP 500 0.1 for the quarter. If you remember what Bridgewater does, it's a risk parity. Basically, they have four windows. They focus on either rising or falling growth or rising or falling inflation. If you think about towards the end of the second quarter, you're starting to see growth tick down. You started to see inflation tick down. So all that performance here is basically being driven by nominal bonds and inflation of the bond exposure. And again, GMO and Putnam 2.6 and 1.6. These are diversified funds, either stocks, bonds, somewhat emerging market debt, commodities, etc. And they've done a lot better than stocks for the quarter. And finally,
Just one question.
Yeah.
What we're talking about is moving forward.
Mhm.
Are we talking about debt denominated in local currency?
You can do either local or you can do external. And it'll be a combination of both. You're not going to be coming up and stop will actually be presenting online. And just one more point, page 17 here, before I turn over to Herschel, is the hedge fund deposit. You see there about 0.6%. The average hedge fund of fund for the quarter was minus 1.2, so as a group, your hedge funds added a pretty good significant amount of value for the quarter, 1.8% in the flat market. And that's what we're here to do. We want to attack on the downside and capture some on the upside. You'll see that when you look at the runner year-to-date numbers. I'll pass it over to Herschel and he'll talk about June and encapsulate all that.
Great, thanks, Keith. If I can get the commissioners to turn to page 114, this is the red number in the top right-hand corner. So it's for the packets. As required by statute, this is a quarterly snapshot of the plan. It includes performance, the asset allocation, and some additional key statistics. I won't review the quarterly performance, and Keith has given us in-depth view there. But I will call your attention, we'll get into some more depth here for the fiscal year end. The one-year number, we're 18.59% versus the policy benchmark of 17.12, so we've outperformed the indices again this year. With that said, I'll call your attention to the top right, the pie chart there, that gets into more of the diversification of the portfolios to where we're positioned as of 6/30/2011. And as Bob comes back, I know he wanted to make some additional comments there as well. If I call your attention then to the middle of the page, what this is a bar chart that shows the actual asset value for fiscal year ends for the past 10 years. And fiscal year ending 6/30, we were at $26.29 billion. As we take a look at the bars below the line, what those are doing is actually capturing the benefit payments going out of the plan. So last year we paid out almost $900 million with benefits. On a cumulative basis, that's $6.6 billion over the past 10 years that this has been paid out benefits. As we move forward, if I can get you to move to page 115. This is the June flash report. It goes into a lot more detail, even the manager letter report. And one of the things I'll call your attention to is that for the fiscal year end, the equity markets had a tremendous year. On a more global basis, up some 30+%. With that said, the fixed income markets did well themselves, on a global basis being up the 10% mark, if you will. So with that said, as we move forward to the next page, 116, our equity component of the portfolio. For the fiscal year, we've had 4 out of the 6 managers outperforming and beat their benchmark. The equity in total performed very well, adding several hundred basis points over the equity benchmark as well. With respect to fixed income, which we show on page 117, again, the broader fixed income markets on a global basis up about 10%. Here, 11 of the 14 managers have outperformed their benchmark for the trailing one-year period as of 6/30. One notable standout, if you will, unfortunately, to the negative side, which we'll address a little bit later, is Amundi or Credit Agricole. You've probably seen a lot of negative press about that manager in the media here lately. So we will take up a discussion about respect to Amundi and what we should do with that relationship going forward a little bit later in the commission meeting. With respect to private equity, on the next page, Again, this is an asset class that we have a 10% target. We have currently at the funded level about a little over 7%, so we're roughly close to 3% underweight there. Again, you notice private equity, it takes time to build those positions. These are not publicly traded securities where you just instantly buy into that market. Dave Clapper will make a couple of presentations that he and Dr. Pritchett have done some due diligence on, so we'll have a couple of recommendations for some additional allocations to private equity a little bit later in the commission meeting. With respect to the hedge funds, for fiscal year, they continue to perform well, up over 11.6% versus their benchmark of 4.2%, so significant value added there. One note that I will call your attention to is that Grosvenor's, because you will remember, we have moved from the fund-to-fund structure into more of a strategic partnership or relationship. To facilitate and help that transition, one of the things that we have done is we have submitted the redemption as a timing of the cash flow for redemption versus the investments. So we have given a bridge loan of $100 million to Grosvenor to help manage the timing of redemptions versus the investment period.
What's our total?
750. So that additional $100 million will be repatriated back to the plan here in the middle of November.
Under our annual investment plan.
That the chairman is allowed to put some 1% deviation from additional allocation.
As long as he notifies the commission, and so that's.
So you're talking about the GSO transaction?
I'm sorry, the growth.
And that was just a timing difference. We were awaiting a liquidation receipt.
And the bridge loan was made with respect to the contractual terms of that relationship. Moving forward to the GAA and risk parity bucket, this is one area that, on a relative basis, was a detractor from the portfolio. With that said, the return for that component was still 18.9% for the year, so versus the benchmark of 20.4%. So still, while a detractor, still a very good return. With respect to real estate, this is an area very similar to private equity, that it just takes time to actually get capital invested into the ground. We have about a 5% underweight to real estate, and last year real estate actually rallied somewhat to about 17% return. So that too itself, just from the timing perspective, being able to get assets invested, creates a little bit of a drag or detractor to the overall performance as well. So those were my comments with respect to performance for the past fiscal year. And I believe Mr. Gordon wanted to make some additional comments with respect to the current position of the plan and some things that, excuse me, that we've done over the past week.
Can I ask a question, please? I was looking up through all this last night. Avalon Fund 2 shows 82% loss for 2. That's because it's not funded, right? I mean,
This is J-curve. So in other words, when they're calling down,
They call a management fee.
Management
out,
fee.
They don't have an investment.
Okay.
There's no
They-
investment,
so
right.
They haven't.
They hadn't even made an
It's
investment
not,
yet.
it's not even closed yet.
Right.
Okay.
so,
All right, that fit, okay, got it.
so that is one of the.
Got it.
That's the J curve.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and some of the mitigants there would be investments and co-investments where you don't have the J-curve. If there are no other questions, I'll turn it over to Mr. Gordon for some additional comments.
Okay. I wanted to give some big picture points of where we've been and where we're heading. We, did a lot of work to diversify this plan and reduce the equity risk exposure that was in this plan when we created the commission. And for those of you who've been around a long time, know this, but for everyone in the room, when the commission took over the plan, 95% of the risk in the plan was coming from public equity markets. And we systematically wanted to balance our risks much better, and the key to doing that was diversification. We also, as we sat here in 2008, looked at the fact that there were far better risk-adjusted returns in credit instruments, fixed income instruments, other direct investments that had more idiosyncratic risk and were not linked to the market. And we had a very conservative posture. We have a significantly lower long equity component than most other public plans. When you do get into periods where the market is just going up and up and up and up and up, risk is getting paid for very, very well, we will lag those markets because we've taken a lot of that risk off the table. But when you get into markets like we've had in the last 2 months, you know, our program will really hold up much, much better than other public funds that have all this long equity risk. I mean, you live by it and you die by it, and it's, you know, it's kind of risk that when it's working, it looks like great risk to take, but it snaps back pretty quickly. So we are already underweight our peers. In the end of July, we were using a proxy of small cap and mid cap for our unfunded private equity. We can't get private equity in the ground that quick, so you have a gap there. So we used public equity to fill that. We thought public equity has had a really big run, so we took that off. And that was about $450 million, give or take, close to $500 million of equity we took off into July. Couldn't have had better timing on that. Maybe another point that Herschel touched on, but if there's another structural problem we've been struggling with is when we have a real estate allocation set to 5% and you can't put the real estate in the ground immediately, you're exposed there. Whatever the real estate market does, you're not participating in it. And last year it had this big run-up. Well, it's coming back to us now, and we're going to look at some possible synthetic plays there. So we have, after the debt standoff, when we were sitting in this meeting in July, we were right on the precipice of the downgrade. And we asked ourselves, you know, what was going to happen then? Predictably, all of the high yield assets got repriced significantly. Anything that had credit in it, you know, took a real leg down. So credit spreads blew out about 200 basis points. Kind of unpredictably and rather perverse, treasuries rallied. So you get a situation where you've just been downgraded or are a less worthy borrower, and yet value of your debt went up. That's you know, obviously some dynamics of flight to safety still. The European banking situation has been dominating the landscape, and it's estimated that about $1.5 trillion of recapitalization is going to have to happen to stabilize the European banking system. I've been saying for a long time in this commission that I think the euro model as it exists today is broken, is flawed. You can't have a centralized currency and decentralized fiscal policy. It creates a classic moral hazard and agency problems. And there's a lot of breakthroughs that, you know, may occur if they head towards a centralized fiscal policy, or there'll be some dismantling of the EU. But one of those two things will have to happen. There were some moves last night and early this morning for the European banks to extend their lines. They tend to lend money and borrow very short term, and this issue with the euro has created some instability there, and there's been work now with the central banks to extend those lines out 3 months, really stabilize the source of dollars for these banks. So we had a good bit of stabilization there. We have been thinking about underweighting the euro as a tactical play. We did that 2 years ago when Greece was coming to fruition. It's a little perverse right now, though, because a lot of those central banks are doing different things to support the euro. Like the Swiss were so tired of so much money coming into the Swiss franc that the central bank has said, for all the money we're getting in, we're going to turn around and buy euros to stop that flight. And so the euro is actually, was rallied a good bit today. So we haven't put that short on. But what have we done? Now that the 10-year Treasury is down below 2%, when I started my career, the 10-year Treasury was 15.25. This is about as low as it gets. I guess if we fall into Japan, it might get to 1. But the point is, you are not compensated for taking duration risk anymore. If you've got long duration assets, your payoff pattern is, if rates fall a little bit more, you'll get a little juice, but there's all this ceiling to go the other way. So we've been systematically taking duration off the table, selling long bonds. We've been pointing all the high yield cash flows and dispositions in the long-term high yield portfolio into the short-term high yield portfolio. And we sold a lot of these long bonds and bought a significant amount of bank loans. Bank loans are very attractive right now. Senior secured bank loans that we can get unlevered yields of 6 to 7% in, and perhaps levered yields of mid-teens. And we've redeployed about $650 million from longer duration, longer credit assets into short duration and bank loans and emerging market cash and the like.
When you say you report it short duration, how short?
3 years or less. The bank loans are all floating. So that's essentially, they might have a maturity of 3 or 4 years, but they're floating rates, so the duration is essentially 30 days.
90 days.
And essentially, those are basically LIBOR based.
So a couple of the themes is getting duration down and getting that longer, broad public credit exposure down, and taking credit risk in a more targeted, idiosyncratic way where we've got a lot more clarity on it. The other thing we've done is, because we think we're in a period of long volatility, and James, can you go to this second to the last page? And the last page of the book, we just added this. We are doing a cashless equity replacement, and it's using options. Instead of buying, we're underweight equity, and we have a choice to buy long equity or not. What we're seeing, because of the high volatility, is there's a cashless equity replacement where we basically, and this will all make sense when you see the graph, we sell a put option, because everyone wants to buy protection, and they're paying way up for it. That's 5% out of the market, 5% out of the money from where we are the day we buy it. We buy 2 calls with that at the money, and then sell 2 calls farther out of the money. And if we look at the last graph, this is where it really makes sense. If we are looking to rebalance and buy more equity, because we're underweight our equity targets, and we think maybe we don't want to be so underweight, because even our targets are way underweight our peers. If we bought in, the black dotted line is what we get. You buy it, and if the market goes up, it goes up, and down, it goes down. These combinations of options and puts creates this payoff pattern where we have a put that gives us protection for the first 5% of trading down in the market. So we're actually gaining. If we'd have been long, we'd be here, but we're actually out on this put option. So we have all this protection we buy. And then we went long the 2 calls at the money, so if the market goes up, which is the black dotted line, we're going up at twice the rate of the market. And where's the downside in this? The downside in this is we sell off the calls up 6%. So if the market rallies beyond that, we've now foregone that gain. But we're underweight equities. We have the cash. All we have to do at that point is to go back long in the market. The market is doing this. Down 3 one day, up 3 the next, down 2, up 5, down 3. And we plotted out here like the last several trading days of what the value of this thing's doing. And so we really like this trade, because if the market's going to whip around a bunch, we can put on some exposure that we're winning no matter what direction it moves. And the only thing we have to be cognizant of is if it's going to rally a whole bunch, maybe we go on and put on the long asset. And if we think that this is going to really tail down, we sell some other long assets and take that off. This trade is really efficient in these kind of markets. So we're sitting here thinking, how do we get yield? Bank loans are paying great yield, but they're short duration, so we don't have the duration exposure. The credit risk is manageable. You've got to have, obviously, very good partners that do good fundamental credit analysis. You have to diversify it. But shorten duration, keep up yield, and then play volatility. Take volatility to our advantage. And those are the 3 things we've been doing here over the last 6 weeks that I think are all fundamentally adding some value to the plan today. So I just wanted to let you know, when we're not running around dealing with politics and going across the street and stuff, we are trying to spend time daily doing this stuff, and there's been some pretty interesting things that we've done.
Is it the first time we've done this?
Mm-hmm. And we've done this, by the way, in conjunction with Russell and Goldman. They both have been doing this a bunch. Goldman's been doing this a whole bunch. And when we get that sidecar portfolio to that Coldwell TA portfolio we built with Goldman. We'll have another vehicle that we can do these in, perhaps even more sophisticated. Now, just as a point of clarification, these are convergence trades. We did roughly 6-month options here. And at expiration, you're going to be somewhere. You're going to have a strike and you're going to be in the money or out of the money. Over the course of time between now and then, your gain is not simply where am I on the strike price. Because if you want to unravel this whole thing, you do the opposite trades. You buy puts, sell calls, and just unwind it. If volatility has spiked up much more since then, the cost of those trades may not work out. You may not be able to lock that in. But at convergence, you do. So you do have some marking issues to, that you have to live with, but it's a convergence trade. And it's really, really advantageous for an investor who is a natural long investor. Your choice here, as I said, is we can either ride the black line or we can ride these green lines, knowing that our one thing that we would give up is this red triangle, which we can neutralize by going long that notional dollar amount on the black line.
Are we doing this in-house or through a?
We're doing it through Russell as our executing entity, but our investment committee is setting the trades. And these work now because you got high volatility. As volatility lowers, that area, the green, skinnies down. And so there's certain time periods when the market's trending up, like 6 months ago, and vol is low, you don't get near the payoff here. And then you got to worry about that red triangle because the market can keep moving up. But the beauty is we can neutralize that day one, and we know exactly what level that needs to be. So that's those 3 things I wanted to share with you about how we're thinking about rebalancing and hopefully trying to protect this fund in these times of what looks to be very, very choppy markets. And this might be the best time for me to go ahead and get this out on the table. There's going to be a lot of discussion about expected rates of return and assumed rates of return and funding the pension plan. And Mr. Chairman, you said it quite clearly in my office the other week. We think about, should we use lower assumed rates of return? What is this portfolio likely to do? When you think about the textbook capital asset pricing model, it says that you start with the risk-free rate and an inflation premium, and then there's a risk premium for the particular asset or market you're going into. Those 3 things add up to expected rate of return. When you look historically, long periods of time, over the last 30 years, you would say the risk-free rate, let's say 3%. Inflation, let's say 3%. And a risk premium of maybe 2 or 3%, just depending on, what markets you want to go into. So it gets easy to say 3 plus 3 plus 2, that's 8. Well, where are we today? The risk-free rate is 0. You got to take it out to 4 decimal points or something to see a number there, but it's essentially 0. Inflation has even been negative in some recent periods, but it's low, 1%.
2-4 trailer.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
2-4 trailer, yep.
So 2.4. Okay. So 0 plus 2.4 plus a risk premium that hasn't, these risk premiums kind of come in and out and the like. They actually have been converging. When you have this run up in the markets over the last 2 years, risk premiums get collapsed. Now they're starting to widen back out, and that's why we want to have short duration assets that we can easily sell, generating income, have some dry powder. But that risk premium is not blown way out. And I mean, let's say it's 2 or 3%, even if it's 4. You don't get there. You don't take 4% risk premium and 0% risk-free rate and 2.5% inflation, and you've got 6.5%. So, we clearly, have got to do some things to capture as much risk premium as we can, but we all know that also adds to the volatility and means that the range of outcomes, can be quite wide in any given year. So I just thought it, important to lay those things out and why we're thinking about, the news isn't all bad. Like I said, I think we can take a modest amount of credit risk in bank loan space bank loans are an interesting play because the credit rating agencies aren't giving you credit ratings for all the different slices of your capital stack. And if you're a double B company, the senior secured piece of that debt, still kind of gets infected by the fact that you're a double B company, even though it's senior secured. And that's where we're seeing these very attractive rates at, 5, 6, 7%. And, there can be a little leverage put on those things, to make them double digits. So there are, some fairly straightforward plays that can get some return. But, we have to look at holding cash for benefits. We need cash for, let's say, almost a year's worth of benefits. You got about $1 billion that sits there earning nothing. You got to have 30% fixed income. I think, Duncan, you said that Pepsi issued a, what was it, 10-year bond?
10-year deal, 248.
248, or a corporate bond issue yesterday. You can see the challenge that we've got. So, our focus is going to be to try to capture as much risk premium as we can, within the confines of, sanity, right? And we think they're out there, but they increasingly, and this is where this all feeds together. It means that the program has got to be more creative, it's got to be more complex. We have to have the resources to administer this program, both the human resources and the technical resources, to have a chance to get there. So we need budgetary support and flexibility, and if we can't get that, you have to think of another model. And the other model is, well, let's not try to do all these direct investments and exotic strategies, and let's just buy, treasuries and corporates and, index funds. And you can see the effect of the state thinking of lowering the assumed rate of return from 8 to 7.5 is probably going to be extremely painful for the state to deal with. If you think about lowering it to 6 or 5, it's, it can be, it tip over the whole equation.
As a point of reference, Doug, you said PepsiCo was what, 2.5 to 10 years?
Yeah, 248.
Just as a point of reference, I own the common stock. The common stock is traded at a PE of around 10 or 11. The common stock yield is almost 4%, or over 4%, which is completely something that,
Should never happen, right?
nobody at this table's ever seen before.
Well,
And you can go down the list, Johnson Johnson, Abbott Labs, and look at these stocks. The common stock trades 200 basis over the comparable 10-year corporate, which is unheard of.
yeah, I think
What's it tell you?
statistically, it's interesting, I think, maybe it's only happened twice in the last 50 years, that the yield on the S&P 500 has exceeded the 10-year Treasury. So we've had a total reversal here. I mean, when many of us started in business, it was just assumed that equities should yield more than bonds. And then through a period of time, that totally reversed. So I guess you could make a significant case that it would achieve. But obviously, it's kind of volatile environment we're in, but you're pursuing probably.
For what it's worth, I did do a call with Professor Reinhardt, who wrote After the Fall and This Time is Different. She actually thinks in these environments, the equity risk premium is pretty attractive but highly volatile. Is what their work suggests going forward.
And there is this we don't have a mechanism to do internally. It's easy to do though, and we might have to do it in the derivative space. But some of this equity, parking it in a diversified, large cap, dividend-focused pool of money for that very reason, is something we should be thinking about. We actually have thinking about. We just don't have, we don't have an approved mechanism from the commission to buy individual holdings like that, so we have to basket them and do a trade on it.
Bob, we were talking last, and I think you had a cute sort of an aside, we were talking about this, and you rather own 10-year treasuries at 2%, or Band-Aids and diapers, Johnson & Johnson, at 4%. I'll bet you in 10 years, I'll take Band-Aids and diapers myself.
Right, and this, recessions, babies still need diapers, right? So those are rather inelastic.
Hopefully not false opinions there.
All right, well, I know we need to get moving on. We've got several investments that are teed up that are all part of our plans. We have a couple of interesting things here that we need to talk about in Crescent and Amundi. But if I could maybe turn it over Mike, are you ready to say a couple things about Amundi? I mean about Mondrian, I'm sorry.
I think this is on page 130. But I'll run through a little bit here. This is the motion is that the staff recommends that we make a $100 million allocation to Mondrian emerging market debt strategy. We currently have a 3% target allocation to our emerging market debt. And around that, we have a 0 to 20% maximum range. And we currently only have one active manager in that being Cap Guardian. Mr. Giovi asked about local currencies. Cap Guardian is a 50-50 hard currency versus local currency in their strategy. We felt it was prudent to look to add some diversification and some more capacity in that allocation by searching for an additional manager. So we went through using NEPC's focused placement list of EMD managers. And as we went through those analysis, Mondrian surfaced as the one that we would recommend.
Well, as a point of reference, we've always had this as a subset of the Mondrian relationship. It was always two distinct portfolios. We originally did due diligence on both. We've had it as a subset that was bundled within the overall portfolio. But because we want the capacity to be able to overweight emerging market debt for some of the reasons we were just talking about earlier, we want to pull that vehicle out and give it some more scale.
Question, in light of what you said in terms of bringing the duration, how does duration fit in this time? Is it consistent with your views on short duration?
I think it can be. We have some, with Cap Guardian, I believe that is very
It's like
shorter,
4.5 years.
shorter duration. But now you get into this interest rate parity and purchasing power parity with these emerging markets, and theoretically those differences in rates are accounted for in that. But to your question specifically, that really doesn't do much to move our duration needle. The overall duration is still there. Now,
The reason I asked
right.
is because we're seeing some extraordinary things happening in Mexico 2 weeks ago. We had 100 years of bond. I'm not sure we want to see participate in 100-year Mexico.
Perpetuals is what I guess they used to be called, right?
Well, yeah, the English for many years issued perpetuals, but they didn't do that. But I'm not sure that they'd be very comfortable with 100 years.
No, I think where a lot of this emerging market debt is focused, as you might imagine, is the commodity-based currencies and the BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, and China that have a lot of growth. So it's basically the high growth markets and the commodity markets, which Mexico is arguably not really high on.
If I could just interrupt 2 seconds, just because I need to slide out, so I'm going to relinquish the chair temporarily. Chairman. Okay. Thank you. Question.
Speaking to Mondrian, our commission, we currently have a relationship with Mondrian in our global fixed income portfolio. As Bob was alluding, inside that GFI strategy, there's an 80-20 split. The 20% is the emerging market debt strategy that we're recommending here. For us to gain more exposure, we can't direct that 20 in that global fixed income investment up more or down, because that is a commingled fund. So for us to gain more exposure, we actually have to go into their actual emerging market debt strategy, which in this case is managed by the same team that manages that 20% of their global fixed income product.
Yeah, I think part of the hope there is your point's well taken on the duration. And I think obviously what you hope here is to get some diversification as some of these developed market currencies start really suffering under the weight of their debt, particularly the euro and the dollar. and that countries that have internal sustainable growth mechanisms or are commodity rich, are more insulated from this massive deleveraging of the developed markets have to take. And we just don't have, we have a range, we have a target, and we have a range around it, but we can't balance above the target right now because we don't have a vehicle. This is a handy one because it's a relationship we've had and known, and this is,
Just to give you a few bullet points on Mondrian and their strengths, I mean, they are a top-down oriented firm, and they invest only in the local currency market in this strategy. In those markets, they target what's called a prospective real yield, and to get to that, they use inflation forecasts based on a combination of proprietary quantitative and qualitative analysis. They basically start with an inflation forecast that determines the PRO, or the prospective real yield. They run this through their proprietary optimizer, and then they determine from that the currency and country allocations that they're going to make. And those allocations are not just expressed in this strategy. Whatever those allocations come out, they flow through all their other strategies as well.
Do they use any hedging strategies in current yield?
no. What they do is absolute focus in the underpinning, though, of purchasing power parity and interest rate parity, and look for those imbalances and make that plan.
To give a few bullet points just on performance, I know we've got a lot to go through today. Using the eVestment Alliance and a peer group ranking of emerging market debt managers, local currency. Over the past 5 years, they've consistently ranked in the top 25th percentile, and in that 5-year rank, they were first. When we take this and compare it to NEPC's focused placement list that they provided for EMD strategies, running it through eVestment, again, they placed in the top 25th percentile. As of June 30th of this year, they outperformed their benchmark by 100 basis points. How do we come up with $100 million as allocation amount? Again, we use a tool that NEPC has called their risk budgeting analysis. And they compared, if we use Mondrian for Cap Guardian, how does that look from a risk budgeting standpoint for us? And the number that came out was it would be 1.5% of our total plan assets, which in this case is we would recommend $100 million up to that 1.5%. So as we go forward, again, the conclusion I have here is that this is a high value oriented top-down strategy that had stable leadership over the past 20 years. In fact, at the beginning or the end of July this year, they actually became 100% employee owned. Went through NEPC, done a full due diligence. They have recommendation in your package as well. And then the familiarity with the team that we currently have in our GFI space. So the motion on the table is actually to we recommend the Investment Commission adopt a motion to authorize RSIC to commit an initial funding of $100 million to Mondrian's Emerging Market Debt Fund with a limit of 1.5% of plan assets.
How much is 1.5% of assets? How do we get there?
Well, our target is 3% for the emerging market debt asset allocation, which I think that's around $750 million or so. So we're saying half of that, 3% up to it. If we're in a situation where Cap Guardian, they start their performance starts to drop, whatever may happen with them, it allows us, while we're maybe looking for another manager, to move some assets within.
So they're a standing committee, right? That commission, that investment team, a standing.
Yes, they're a
So they
team
can
that
make
we.
their own motion, requires no second, right?
They're not the same mission meeting.
No.
They're an existing manager.
Okay,
And
I'm not
this-
coming down, coming to the
No, this is coming to the commission.
No, he's not, the commission needs to make a motion. The motion that he's asking the commission to make is the $100
I'll
million.
make the motion.
Is there a second? Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Ayes have it.
Okay, next item, starting on page 140, are the follow-up on the international equity search that has been ongoing. Those are the last two managers that the due diligence team would like to recommend. Jeff, you want to carry us through that?
Thank you. As you all recall, we began the international search early this year. We came to the commission in April, and the commission approved Ernest Partners, and what we're going to talk about today are two additional managers, Tradewinds Global Investors and Johnson Asset Management, to complete the search. And just find the arrow here, I apologize. Just a real fast review of the process. Jared O'Connor and I have been working with NEPC and Commissioner Powers for the bulk of the year. We initially started looking at 14 managers, 11 that were sourced from NEPC, and then 3 additional managers we wanted to consider. We held meetings with 5 firms here in Columbia, and that allowed us to narrow the field, and we then went out and did on-site due diligence. Tradewinds out in Los Angeles, and Johnston up in Connecticut. And obviously, what we're going to talk about today is the recommendation from the research. So, Tradewinds Global Investors, they're the ones that are based out in Los Angeles. They are a bit unique in that they are presently owned by a private equity firm called Madison Dearborn Partners. Why does this matter? A lot of times when you like to see the employees be the owners of the firm, so this is just something that we want to make sure the commission understands. Madison Dearborn has structured the relationship such that the key people are compensated as though they were equity owners. So that was something that we were very appreciative of finding, and allays our concerns around semi-unorthodox ownership structure. So the team, ultimately, that's who we're investing with. And in the case of Tradewinds, very specifically, the CIO's name is Dave Ivan. He is critical to the operations of this firm. And we'll review the investment process and how he has his imprint on the portfolios. I'll go over that in just a second. But it's a big team. They have 17 analysts that are accountable, and again, because they are key to the firm, they are compensated very handsomely, which is something we like to see, but they're compensated more specifically that we like to see based upon their performance. And I'll come back to that point in just a moment. But also, in light of the fact that they are part of the private equity firm, they have recently begun an initiative recognizing that at some point the private equity firm will sell them, to make sure that they have in-house certain critical functions such as operations, the marketing, product development, as well as the legal function. And this is, as it's been articulated to us, this is going to be a protracted transition for them that will take some time, but we have every confidence after meeting the team that they are addressing the important issues and doing so in very strong fashion. So, with respect to the track record, the firm has added, I apologize for digging in my notes here, over the last 5 years, just to give a sense of what it's one thing for me to tell you they've had strong performance, another thing to show it. Over the last 5 years, their returns have been about 6.6%, which has beaten the benchmark by 4% per year, which is obviously the type of excess return we'd like to be participating in. We've done our quantitative analysis and found that, in fact, the alpha is coming from security selection as opposed to their ability to dance in and out of markets. They're value investors, and they are very focused on buying strong companies at the right price. And that's essentially, I think everyone believes they're doing that, but their proof is in the pudding, and the results have been spectacular. So I mentioned the CIO. He essentially is the gatekeeper for every portfolio. And what I mean by that is, and I'm going to skip ahead here, my goal here is to not keep you till dinner tonight. So if you want to ask questions and slow me down, please do so. But in their investment process, everything that winds up in a portfolio has to be signed off on by either the CIO or the director of research. And they, quite frankly, in practice, work very closely together. So there's not a stock that's going to wind up in a portfolio that has not been heavily researched by an analyst and then subjected to a very critical eye by the CIO and or the director of research. So what specifically are they looking for? They're looking for firms that have very predictable earnings, strong earnings, and very stable and sustainable competitive advantages. So ultimately, what we get here is we get a value portfolio that they are very, very aggressive about not paying too much, because as they define risk, the risk is permanent loss of capital that flows from having paid too much for an asset. So if you think about that, I think that that's exactly what you want to see from a value discipline. Now, in light of following Mike with the questions around the currency issue, we need to expect that these both of these managers, actually even Ernest Partners, who was approved not last meeting, in the April meeting, we're not going to see them hedging currencies. We're going to be investing in non-dollar assets here. And they may hedge opportunistically in order to offset expected cash flows from either the purchase or sale of a security, but they are not going to programmatically be hedging. They are looking for superior companies, and with respect to the currency issue, that's embedded in their analysis of what companies tell them. So there's not a separate overlay of currency management that goes on here. Well, first of all, are there any questions? So and I also want to make sure that we understand here that there are going to be 3 motions for 2 managers. The first motions are going to be for each manager to invest in their fund. And then the third motion will be a way that we may be able to implement that will get us superior transparency, economics, and data flow for risk aggregation purposes. So, but the motion that I've put to the commission is that we approve trade winds for about $130 million allocation, which is 0.5% of the portfolio, with an upper limit of 1.5%. Now, also, how does that fit with the portfolio construction? We have a target of 8% to international equities. That is divided between a passive and an active component. 6% is the target for passive implementation. So what we're talking about here is the other 2%. These 3 managers will comprise that active component. I want to make sure that we understand how this fits within the equity allocation properly. So, yes,
This is 8% allocation.
It's 8% of the direct equity allocation is 30% of the plan. So how that breaks down is just going off the cuff here. It is 9% to U.S. large cap, 5% to U.S. small cap, and 8% to international, and 8% to emerging. Getting into the third.
I just had a clarification question on the wording of the motion. Are you asking for approval to invest $130 million at this point, and you have flexibility to invest another, say, $260 million later?
Yes. What we're asking for the approval is initial allocation here today, and then the staff you know, as we rebalance the portfolio, can make the determination in the future, but essentially to approve the manager with an additional funding that would correspond to.
Your request is in percentage terms, not in dollars.
Correct, so that we don't have to revisit, if the plan grows to 30 billion, we don't have to come back and scale your different investments back. We're starting to reference these in percentage terms.
Okay.
So that is the first manager, and I'll pause for the commission to consider the motion.
Do you want us to consider, these three managers go together, right? Same string?
Correct. Correct.
Could we consider that in case somebody wants to reallocate? Or should you, is it the sense of the commission that somebody wants to make a motion one at a time?
It's at your preference.
Okay, did I hear a motion on this? No. Is there a second? Second. Okay, further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Ayes have it.
So we'll move on to Johnston. Whereas Tradewinds is the value side of the equation, Johnston brings to us the growth discipline. So that we, this is thoughtfully constructed a balanced portfolio here. The firm founded by Richard Johnston in 1985. The person that we are most interested in is the portfolio manager of this product, Cassandra Hardman. She joined in 1997 specifically to turn what was a domestic shop into a global platform. She is somebody that we need to make sure is very interested and motivated to stay with the firm. To that end, they have begun an ownership transfer that not just from Mr. Johnston to all of the employees, which is a part of it, but very specifically a large transfer of that ownership to Ms. Hardman. It is a much smaller investment team than Tradewinds and Earnest Partners that we approved back in April, but it's a team that works well together and leverages a proprietary quantitative screen in order to distill what is a very broad universe known as, let's skip the next page here, of 53,000 stocks that they consider. They screen that down to 1,000 very quickly. And then what they do is they force rank the 1,000 names according to their proprietary algorithm that features sustainable growth metrics, valuation metrics one that they think of as price to earnings power, in order to really produce a list that is ranked in the order of attractiveness to them. So then they focus their time on the 250 names at the top of that list. So obviously if you have a smaller team, you're doing a lot more with respect to screening the universe. I want to make sure that is understood. After they do this, they go over that list on a monthly basis, and they're not looking for reasons to own things, they're looking for the reason that you don't want to own something. So they're looking for what they think is the fatal flaw for every company, so that they can wind up ultimately researching a much smaller number of companies, but doing so in a very robust fashion, such that they can have a collaborative meeting where they have a devil's advocate test designed to really review all of the assumptions that an analyst has made in his or her work, and to really test the strength of the convictions. So ultimately, you wind up with, because of the process, a very concentrated portfolio for these guys. And specifically, that's 20 to 30 companies that have a strong growth profile, and I'm going to apologize, I'm going to back up, and has satisfied 5 key criteria. Not most of them. They require that every company in the portfolio satisfies 5 key criteria. 1, market leadership, or a very insulated niche. 2, strong secular and very predictable earnings growth. And that growth has to be projected to be 10% or greater. And that, obviously, in the present environment, makes it very easy to scale your 53,000 stocks down to a very manageable number. But they need a quality business and strong, and emphasis here, ethical management. But then that gives you a list of companies that may be very expensive. So now you have to apply a valuation screen. So they look for things that are trading below their fundamental value, and also names that have very sufficient liquidity, because if you're going to run a very concentrated portfolio, you have to make sure that you are trading in names that are liquid and can take your investment without moving the market. So, are there any questions with regard to Johnson? Hearing none. The motion here is for a similar approval for $130 million initial allocation, with a limit also of 1.5% plan incentives.
Do I hear a motion? Is there a second? Further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
And the final motion deals with, what we've done here is approve the participation in the commingled product, but if we are able to, and we believe that we are able to do so in a very easy fashion, if we were able to have these managers in separate accounts, we have additional transparency. We can do so at favorable economics. There are just a lot of reasons that we should consider to do so. And one thing that Herschel has suggested is that we consider using the Lighthouse platform, which, as you recall, well, I'll let you talk a little bit about how we engage there.
Sure. As the Commissioner will recall, as we started the hedge fund transition, we identified Lighthouse as a platform service provider as well as an investment manager. And we had an allocation of $3 billion for the platform itself to help with the hedge fund transition. The goal was to move as many direct hedge fund investments as we could to more of a separate account mandate, if you will, so we get full level position level transparency or improved transparency, control, risk management. All these key factors apply to the long-only world as well. One of the challenges that we will have would be from an implementation perspective. We tried to do this in a separate account format outside the Lighthouse platform. We have had conversations with Lighthouse, and they are willing and able to take on long-only mandates on the platform itself, where they can create separate account structures for us to invest in. This gives us, again, position level on a daily basis, balance sheet snapshots as well as the P&L, if you will. So it gives us a better way to track and manage the managers. With this said, we would be asking for an increase in that allocation to that platform of approximately $550 million, whatever the allocation is to these managers here. Again, this is a platform, not an investment manager.
And Mr. Treasurer, Travis, this is consistent with what we were discussing in the budget subcommittee about the fact that if we can migrate some of these things to a accounting platform that we control, we can start reducing those overall accounting costs. So here's an opportunity where you can just go directly to your platform, get your administrator, who checked a couple off the boxes you don't have to convert later.
So that would be the third motion.
But Lighthouse is, not a manager per se, but we do have part of the allocation in a strategic partnership, but it is a accounting platform, basically. So what we need to do as a matter of housekeeping is recognize that we will be adding assets to that accounting platform